Tiana was stirring jollof rice at 7 in the morning because her Korean Mafia husband had mentioned once 4 months ago that he missed homemade food when he walked into the kitchen, set an envelope on the counter without looking at her, and said, "I want an open marriage." She turned down the stove, slowly. "I'm sorry." She set down the spatula with the politeness of a woman deciding not to commit a crime. "I think my jollof rice fumes got into my ears. Say that again." "I've met someone." No hesitation, no apology. "Her name is Park Soo-yeon. She's about to have a very bad year," Tiana said. Jae-won, head of the most feared syndicate in Chicago, a man that armed men crossed the street to avoid, finally looked at his wife. She looked back. "Mom, the lawyers have already drafted a modification to our prenuptial agreement," he said. "You sign, you keep everything. Your lifestyle, your accounts, your status. Nothing changes publicly. So you want a whole girlfriend on the side, while I smile at Gallus and pretend my husband isn't embarrassing himself in front of God and the entire criminal underworld?" She tilted her head. "That's the proposal. I want honesty. You want permission. Tiana." Jae-won. Her voice dropped to something quiet and surgical. "I woke up at 6 this morning to make you rice. I have kept 3 of your associates out of federal prison in the last 18 months. I have never once, not once, embarrassed you. So before you finish that sentence, Wayne, I need you to look at me very carefully and ask yourself if you are absolutely certain you want to continue." Something moved behind his eyes. Not guilt, calculation. "If you don't sign," he said, "I'll file for separation. The prenup favors me." She looked at the envelope. She didn't touch it. "I'll think about it," she said. He left without eating the rice. That was his first mistake. He had no idea how many more he was about to make. If you're already feeling Tiana's energy, the way she set down that spatula, you are in exactly the right place. Subscribe right now so you don't miss what she does next. Trust us, you're going to want to see this. She did not cry. She had learned a long time ago that tears were expensive and she spent them only on things worth the cost. This was not worth tears. This was worth strategy. When she sat at the kitchen island for 10 more minutes after he left, she did not move. She looked at the envelope. She looked at the cooling pot of jollof rice on the stove. She looked at the Rolex watch he had forgotten on the counter. His second one, the one she had bought him for their 3rd anniversary, the one he always left charging in the kitchen. She picked up the watch, turned it over. On the back, she had engraved 4 words, "Sharp as you are." She had meant it as a joke. He had laughed when he opened it and then looked at her with that particular look he had, the one that said he was more moved than he was willing to show, and kept it on his wrist for a week straight without taking it off. She set the watch back down, then she went to her office and started working. 3 phone calls, 4 emails, 1 long, careful document review. She had a case filing due in 2 days, and she was not going to let Shin Jae-won's midlife identity crisis get between her and a deadline. She had always been like this, compartmentalized, precise. The ability to hold grief in one room and function fully in the next was both her greatest professional asset and something her therapist had once gently described as a coping mechanism worth examining. She examined it now, briefly, in the mirror of the ensuite bathroom at 11 o'clock at night. What she saw was a woman who looked completely fine. That was always the thing about her. She looked completely fine right up until the moment she was about to do something irreversible. She called her best friend, Tomalola, at 8 in the morning. Tomalola, who worked in finance, one who had the morals of a pirate and the loyalty of a bloodhound, answered on the first ring, which meant she was already awake and already suspicious. "Talk to me," Tomalola said. "He wants an open marriage." A pause. Then, Shin Jae-won, the man whose face makes armed men cry, asked you, Tiana, to share him like a parking spot? He drafted paperwork. Tomalola inhaled sharply. That man has lost his entire mind. He says if I don't sign, he'll invoke the prenup and file for separation. Tiana walked to the window and looked out at the Chicago skyline. He's already seeing someone, Park Soo-yeon. Park Soo-yeon. Tomalola was already typing. Tiana could hear the keyboard. Park is in the daughter of Park Dae-jung, the man who's been trying to absorb Shin Global for 2 years? Tiana went very, very still. Mind say that again. Park Soo-yeon is Park Dae-jung's youngest daughter. She's 26, she just moved to Chicago 3 months ago, and her father has been in a quiet acquisition war with your husband's company since last year. More typing. Tiana, this isn't just cheating, this is a setup. The skyline outside the window seemed sharper suddenly, cleaner, like someone had adjusted the focus on the entire world. He's being played, Tiana said slowly. Or he knows exactly what he's doing and he's trying to get rid of you before he makes a deal with Park Dae-jung that would require him to have a different kind of wife. Tomalola's voice was careful. Either way, you're the obstacle. Tiana thought about the 4 years, about the nights she had translated legal documents until 3 in the morning, and about the meetings she had attended on his behalf, the contracts she had reviewed, the people she had protected. About the version of this man she had believed in, the one who held her when she was exhausted, who argued with her about everything and seemed to love her more for it, who once flew to Lagos to meet her mother and sat through 4 hours of family interrogation without flinching. Where had that man gone? Or had he ever really been there? She picked up the envelope and finally opened it. She read every word. By the time she finished, something cold and clear had settled in her chest. Not heartbreak, not rage, something much more useful. Purpose. She had one phone call to make. One card she had never played, had kept in her wallet like a secret, because she had believed she would never need it. His name was Kwon Tae-seok. I am 52 years old, founder and chairman of Kwon Capital Group, one of the largest private equity firms in Asia Pacific with a growing American portfolio. He was also, in the quiet architecture of organized money and organized crime, the man Shin Jae-won answered to. Not publicly, never publicly, but Tiana knew. She had read enough documents, sat in enough rooms, connected enough dots. She had met Kwon Tae-seok once, at a conference in New York, where he had shaken her hand, looked at her for a long moment and said, "You are much smarter than you allow people to see." Then he had given her his card. She had kept it for 2 years. She dialed. He answered on the first ring. "Miss Okonkwo," he said. He still used her maiden name. She had always found that interesting. "I wondered when you would call. Mr. Kwon, and I need to ask you a direct question." "I prefer direct questions." "Did you know about Park Soo-yeon?" There was a silence that told her everything. "Come to New York," he said finally. "Tonight, I'll send a car." The car was a black Escalade. The driver did not speak. She packed one bag, her laptop, her passport, her grandmother's gold necklace, and the prenuptial agreement in a manila envelope, and she left Chicago without telling Jae-won anything. She turned off her location sharing on her phone. Then she turned her phone off entirely, let him wonder. Kwon Tae-seok's offices were on the 44th floor of a building in Midtown Manhattan that looked like it had been built by people with something to prove. The lobby was marble and silence. The elevator was mirrored. When the doors opened at 44, a young assistant bowed slightly and led her through halls of framed calligraphy and very serious modern art to a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows. She had taken the car in a state of absolute calm. This was something people who didn't know her often mistook for coldness, her ability to be completely still when everything was moving fast. Her mother had it too. Her grandmother had had it, the matriarch of a family of 8 children in Enugu, a woman who had managed the family's trading business through 3 different governments without ever raising her voice. Tiana had inherited this quality the way other women inherited jewelry, as something precious and practical and not always easy to carry. In the car, she had gone through the prenuptial agreement again on her phone, and she had reviewed her own financial situation, the savings accounts in her name, the retirement funds she had been quietly building since before the marriage, the 3 investment accounts she managed independently because she had never, not even when she was most in love, allowed herself to become financially dependent on a single source. Her mother had taught her that. Her father had been brilliant and beloved and died of a heart attack at 51, and her mother had rebuilt from scratch with grace and without complaint, and had said to Tiana on the night before her wedding, "Love him with everything, but keep something that is only yours. Keep a room in the house of yourself that belongs to no one else." Tiana had kept that room. Now she was glad. Kwon Tae-seok stood when she walked in. That was the first surprise. And men like him did not stand for people. They made people stand for them. Tiana, he said. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. Sit, please. She sat. She kept her back straight and her face neutral because she had learned in 4 years that powerful men read faces the way other people read books. He studied her for a moment. Then he said, You already know that Park Dae-jung has been positioning his daughter to get close to my husband? Yes. And you know why. Acquisition, or a merger agreement, or something that requires Jae-won to make a very specific kind of alliance. She set her hands on her knees. And I know that as his wife, as a lawyer with access to his legal documentation and his business structures, I am the single largest obstacle to that alliance being clean. Kwon Tae-seok nodded slowly. Park Dae-jung wants Jae-won to take his daughter as a second wife. It is an old arrangement dressed in modern clothes. If Jae-won has a legal wife who is also his legal counsel and who has signatory access to several of his holding accounts, any merger agreement becomes complicated, legally messy. So they need me gone. Or agreeable. He paused. The open marriage proposal was Dae-jung's idea, not Jae-won's. Tiana blinked. Just once. Meaning your husband is in over his head and possibly does not see the full architecture of what is happening to him. Kwon's voice was even. Dae-jung has been slowly isolating Jae-won from his most trusted advisors, replacing them with his own people. Park Soo-yeon is not just a romantic interest. She is an operative. The silence in the room was enormous. He's being set up, Tiana said quietly, and he handed me divorce papers to help it along. He made a very serious mistake. Kwon leaned forward. I did not build this organization to watch it eaten alive by a man who uses his daughters as chess pieces, and I did not spend 2 years watching you work to see you discarded. He folded his hands. I have a proposal. Tiana looked at him steadily. I'm listening. I want you to come work for me, not as Jae-won's wife, as yourself. Senior legal counsel, Kwon Capital, full authority, full compensation, your own team. He slid a folder across the desk. Your own office, in this building. She opened the folder. The number on the first page made her carefully keep her face still. And in exchange, she asked, help me expose Park Dae-jung before he finishes what he started. Kwon's eyes were very calm. And if you are willing, be present when the world sees exactly who has been playing whom. Tiana thought about the jollof rice, still on the stove back in Chicago, slowly cooling in a kitchen she might never go back to. She thought about 4 years, about what was real and what had been theater. She thought about a prenup written by someone else's lawyers. When do I start? She asked. Kwon smiled. It was the smile of a man who had been waiting a very long time. Monday, but first, there is a dinner Friday night, here in New York. Park Dae-jung will be there. Jae-won will be there. He paused. It would be very useful if you were there as well. As your counsel? As my guest. His voice was precise. My very prominent, very publicly announced new senior counsel. Tiana understood. This was not just about law. This was about optics, about walking into a room that her husband expected her to be absent from and making the walls shake. I'll need a dress, she said. Kwon pressed a button on his desk phone. Already handled. The dress arrived the next morning at the hotel Kwon's assistant had booked for her. It was emerald green, structured with a neckline that was elegant without trying too hard. It fit her like it had been made specifically for her body, for her waist, her hips, the length of her torso, in a way that off-the-rack things never did. She stood in front of the mirror and looked at herself for a long time. She looked like someone who had decided. She called Tomalola. Where are you? Tomalola said immediately. Just New York. Jae-won has called me 4 times. He thinks you've disappeared. Good. Tiana. I'm fine. I'm more than fine. She sat down on the edge of the hotel bed. Tommy, I need you to do something for me. I need you to look into Park Soo-yeon's financial activity over the last 6 months, specifically any transfers connected to Park Dae-jung's holding companies. A pause. You're building a case. I'm building several cases. Tomalola exhaled. I love you so much. Yes, I'll have something by Thursday. She turned her phone back on Thursday morning. There were 42 missed calls from Jae-won. There were 11 texts that began as cold and businesslike and slowly, progressively, became something she had never seen from him before. Uncertain. Where are you? Tiana, answer your phone. I need to talk to you. Oink, something is wrong. Call me, please. That last one had been sent at 2 in the morning. She stared at it. She did not call back. She forwarded all the texts to her own email as documentation and put the phone face down on the desk. Tomalola's information arrived at noon. What she found was not subtle. Park Soo-yeon had received 4 wire transfers over 6 months from a shell company traced back to Park Dae-jung's holding structure. The amounts corresponded almost exactly with dates that Tiana later mapped against key moments in Jae-won's recent business calendar: a contract negotiation, a board meeting, a private dinner that Jae-won had told her was a client consultation. She had been feeding information to her father. Tiana compiled everything into a clean, organized file, 47 pages, exhibit tabs. And she worked with the focused pleasure of a woman who had spent 12 years turning complicated truth into airtight arguments. Then she got dressed for dinner. The dinner was at a private dining room in a hotel that made the one she was staying in look modest. 40 guests, all of them people who moved money and power the way other people moved furniture, constantly and without apology. Tiana arrived with Kwon Tae-seok. He offered his arm at the entrance. She took it without hesitation. They walked in like they had been doing it for years. The room stopped. Not dramatically, nothing so obvious. But there was a shift in the air, the way rooms shift when something enters that changes the calculation. She felt it. She was used to rooms shifting when she entered, had been since her second year of law school, and when she had argued a moot court case so comprehensively that the visiting judge had asked her what firm she had already signed with. But this was different. This was a room that had expected her to be in Chicago, crying into a divorce filing. And instead she was here, in emerald green, on the arm of the most powerful man in the room. She could feel the math happening in people's heads, the recalculations, the rapid reassessments. Good, she thought. Let them recalculate. She saw Jae-won before he saw her. He was standing near the far end of the room in a charcoal suit, one hand in his pocket, talking to a man she didn't recognize. He looked exactly the same, composed, dangerous, controlled. Park Soo-yeon was beside him, petite, pretty, wearing a pale dress and a careful smile. Hanshi was watching Jae-won with the attentiveness of someone performing affection rather than feeling it. Tiana catalogued all of this in about 3 seconds. Then Jae-won turned his head. The moment he saw her, his face did something she had never seen it do. It cracked, just slightly, just enough. The controlled mask slipped for 1 full second before he pulled it back. She smiled at him. Politely. The way you smile at someone you used to know. She watched him say something to Soo-yeon. Watch Soo-yeon follow his gaze across the room. Watch Soo-yeon's careful smile remain perfectly in place. Trained, professional, the face of someone who had been instructed to maintain composure regardless, while something behind her eyes went very alert. That, Tiana thought, was interesting. A woman simply jealous would have looked hurt. And a woman who was an operative looked like she was calculating her next move. She filed it. She filed everything. Park Dae-jung was across the room. She recognized him from photographs. A heavy man in his 60s with the eyes of someone used to getting what he wanted. He was watching Kwon Tae-seok. When his gaze moved to Tiana, she saw the exact moment he registered who she was. His expression did not change, but his jaw tightened. Good, she thought. You should be worried. Kwon guided her through the room smoothly, stopping to introduce her to exactly the right people. Tiana Okonkwo, my new senior legal counsel. She's been in Chicago. We've finally convinced her to come to New York. He said it with the tone of a man announcing a significant acquisition. People leaned in, shook her hand. I looked at her with the interest reserved for people who had clearly been elevated. She held every handshake. She remembered every name. She had always been extraordinary at names, a skill she had cultivated deliberately because she had learned early that people who felt seen became allies, and allies were the architecture of everything. One of Kwon's associates, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s named Kim Ji-hyun, who ran a mid-sized private fund, held Tiana's hand a beat longer than protocol required and said in very quiet English, I've read your work on the Kim Harrison case. Impressive. I have been wondering when you would leave Hartwell. She paused. I think Kwon waited for the right moment. Tiana looked at her. Something in that sentence was layered. I think everyone did, she said. Kim Ji-hyun smiled, sharp and knowing. Ainan moved on. Jae-won appeared at her elbow 40 minutes later. We need to talk, he said. His voice was very quiet, very controlled, but underneath it, if you knew him the way she knew him, there was something raw. Tiana turned to him with an expression of pleasant neutrality. Jae-won, I didn't realize you'd be here. You didn't answer my calls. I've been busy, new job. She gestured faintly at the room. It's been quite a week. You're working for Kwon. I am. His jaw flexed. Without telling me. You told me to leave. She kept her voice perfectly even. So I left. Is there something else? There was a long pause. Something moved behind his eyes. Guilt, she thought, and the particular pain of a man who had said something irreversible and was only now understanding what that meant. I made a mistake, he said. You made several. Tiana, not here. She stepped back slightly. And not tonight, I'm working. She turned away and rejoined Kwon's conversation, and she felt Jae-won's gaze on the back of her neck for the rest of the evening like a second heartbeat. Later, as the dinner ended and the room began to thin out, she watched Park Dae-jung cross to Kwon Tae-seok and saw the two men exchange a careful, formal greeting. She stayed 2 steps behind Kwon and said nothing, but she was listening. Dae-jung said in Korean, I was not told your counsel would be here. Kwon said, also in Korean, I don't discuss my staff with competitors. Dae-jung's eyes moved to Tiana. She's Shin's wife. She's my legal counsel, Kwon said pleasantly. They're different things. Dae-jung looked at her directly, testing. My Tiana looked back without blinking. She understood every word of the conversation. She had been studying Korean for 3 years, a fact almost no one in this world knew except Tomilola, and she let none of that show on her face. Dae-jung moved on. Kwon turned to her the moment the man was out of earshot. You understood. Every word. Kwon looked at her for a moment with an expression that might have been admiration. Good, that will matter. The week that followed moved fast. Tiana settled into her new office on the 44th floor like she had always belonged there. The work was real, substantial, complex, the kind of legal architecture she had always been capable of, but had been quietly limited from pursuing while managing the overlapping demands of Jae-won's life. She worked 12-hour days and felt, for the first time in a long time, like the full version of herself. Jae-won sent a formal letter through his attorneys requesting a meeting. She passed it to her own lawyer. She had retained one, a woman named Bridget Choi who had the energy of a woman who had never lost a case and did not plan to start, with instructions to schedule a call and nothing more. The documentary evidence Tomilola had pulled continued to build. By the end of the week, Tiana had cross-referenced Park Soo-yeon's wire transfers against internal communications that a source inside Shin Global, a loyal, long-tenured assistant named Ms. Park, who had worked for Jae-won's father before him and had called Tiana in quiet tears to say something felt wrong, had forwarded carefully through a secure channel. The call from Ms. Park had come on a Tuesday afternoon, and the old woman had called Tiana's personal number, the one she had given her 3 years ago, and said in a low voice, I am sorry to bother you, Mrs. Shin, but there are men in the building I don't recognize. Mr. Shin's calendar has been changed and I wasn't told, and someone went through the physical files in the archive room last Thursday night and tried to reseal the folders. I noticed because the tabs were replaced in the wrong order. A pause. I have been with this family for 22 years. Something is not right. Tiana had listened to every word. Then she had said, Ms. Park, I need you to write down the names of every person you don't recognize. I need the dates they were in the building. If you can access the sign-in logs, photograph them. Do not tell anyone you've called me. Yes, Mrs. Shin. And Miss Park, thank you. You did the right thing. The woman had been quiet for a moment. You are the best thing that ever happened to that boy, she said, even if he doesn't know it yet. Tiana had hung up the phone and allowed herself for exactly 30 seconds to feel how much that hurt. Then she had put it away and gotten back to work. The picture that emerged from all of it was clinical and ugly. Park Dae-jung had identified Jae-won's company 3 years ago as the ideal structural anchor for a larger hostile consolidation of mid-market Korean holdings in America. He had spent 18 months mapping the weaknesses. When he identified Tiana, her legal access, her signatory authority, her influence over Jae-won's decisions, as the most significant obstacle, he had sent his daughter, not immediately as a romantic threat. When first as a professional contact, a consultant introduced through a mutual associate, someone Jae-won had met in a business context and trusted by the time the romantic dimension appeared. It had been slow, deliberate, and precisely calibrated. The open marriage proposal had been Dae-jung's instruction, relayed through Soo-yeon, not even Jae-won's idea, and Jae-won, brilliant in most things, had not seen it. Tiana sat with this information for a full evening, alone in her hotel room. She had not yet moved into the apartment Kwon had offered as part of her compensation package because she was not yet ready to make permanent the geography of this new life. She let herself feel the full weight of it. She was furious, not at the manipulation. She had seen manipulation before. She was furious because she had trusted him. Because she had believed in the complicated private architecture of their marriage, that whatever else was true, he saw her. And in one conversation over coffee, standing in his good suit like a stranger, he had handed her a document that said she could be managed, that she was a variable to be handled, not a person, not a partner. He had not seen it coming from Dae-jung, but he had still handed her that envelope. That was the thing she kept returning to. He had been played, but he had chosen to play along. She picked up her phone, not to call him, to call her mother. Her mother, Dr. Ngozi Okonkwo, professor of international law at the University of Lagos, and the single most formidable woman Tiana had ever known, answered with the tone of someone who had been expecting this call for several months. "Nayam," her mother said. "I'm my child." "Mama." Tiana's voice did something it had not done all week. It softened. "Tell me." So she did, all of it. Her mother listened without interruption, a skill that Tiana had inherited, the ability to be fully present in silence, to absorb everything before speaking. When Tiana finished, her mother said, "What does your chest feel like?" Tiana thought about it. "Clear," she said. "Sad, but clear." "Then you already know what to do." "I'm going to take apart everything Park Dae-jung has built in this market. Legally, completely." "Good." A pause. "And Jae-won?" "I don't know yet." "That is also a kind of answer," her mother said. And then, because she was who she was, "Send me the prenuptial agreement. I have colleagues in family law in New York." Tiana almost laughed. "Already done." 2 weeks after the dinner, Kwon Tae-seok called her into his office. "It's time," he said. He placed a file on the desk between them. It contained documentation of Park Dae-jung's full operation, including communications that Kwon's own investigators had compiled, which layered perfectly with everything Tiana had built independently. Together, they constituted a case for market manipulation, illegal acquisition structuring, and the bribery of at least 3 corporate officers within Shin Global Holdings. "We go to the regulatory bodies," Tiana said, not a question. "And to the press, simultaneously." Kwon looked at her steadily. "Your name will be on this." "I know." "Dae-jung will not be gracious about it." "I'm not asking him to be gracious. I'm asking him to be accountable." She picked up the file. "And give me 48 hours to finalize the legal submission. Then we move." She worked for 48 hours with her team, 4 of the sharpest young attorneys she had quickly assembled in her new role, cross-referencing, citing, building the submission into something that could not be argued away. She filed it with the SEC and the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority on a Wednesday morning. She sent an information package to 3 journalists at 3 separate major outlets, each of whom had covered financial crime before, at the same moment. By Thursday afternoon, Park Dae-jung's name was in headlines. By Friday morning, his Chicago acquisition campaign had been formally paused pending investigation. By Friday evening, 3 of his corporate officers had lawyered up and gone quiet. By Saturday, Park Soo-yeon had left Chicago. Tiana found out about that last part from Ms. Park, the assistant, who sent her a single text. "She's gone. He doesn't look good. She read the text once, saved it, and went back to work. The call from Jae-won came Saturday night. She let it ring. Then he called again. Then he called a third time, and something made her pick up. "I know what you did," he said. "You're going to need to be more specific." Dae-jung, the SEC filing. His voice was stripped of everything except rawness. "That was you." "That was evidence," she said. "I just organized it." He was quiet for a moment. "Soo-yeon is gone." "I heard." She waited. He said nothing for so long that she thought the call had dropped. "She took the USB drive from my home office," he said finally. "I didn't know. And I didn't even realize anything was gone until my security team did an audit this week." His voice was controlled, but underneath it was something she recognized, the sound of a man who had been comprehensively fooled and was only now mapping the full scope of it. 3 months of financial projections, the acquisition target list for 2025, my father's original trust documents. A pause. "I am the most careful man I know, Tiana, and I didn't see any of it." "I know." "How?" His voice was sharp suddenly. "How did you see it from outside when I couldn't see it from inside?" "Because I wasn't inside," she said. "I was watching from the doorway. You were too close to it. She was introduced to you slowly by people you trusted, in contexts that made sense. By the time the romantic element appeared, she was already part of your normal landscape. That's how it works." She paused. "Also, I'm a lawyer. We're professionally paranoid." He made a sound that might have been a short, bitter laugh. "I gave you divorce papers to get rid of you, and you turned around and saved my company." "I didn't do it for your company." "I know, that makes it worse." His voice dropped. "Tiana, I made a choice when I didn't know what I was doing, and it nearly destroyed everything, including you." "It didn't destroy me," she said quietly. "It relocated me." "Is there a difference?" "Enormous," she said. "Destroyed people don't file 47-page regulatory submissions." Another short sound, this one closer to genuine. But then, "I'm sorry, I need you to know that. Not as a legal preamble, not because I need something from you. When I'm genuinely sorry for handing you that envelope, for not coming to you, for letting them convince me you were a threat." She held the phone and felt the weight of it, the strange, complicated gravity of loving someone who had hurt you and knowing they understood, finally, exactly how. "I know," she said. "I believe you." "That's not enough." "No," she agreed. "It isn't, but it's where we are." She hung up. The weeks after the filing were the kind of weeks that reconfigure the landscape of an entire industry. Park Dae-jung's operation in the American market collapsed like a building with the foundation pulled out, not explosively, but structurally, inevitably, one wall at a time. 3 acquisition targets renegotiated their positions, 2 of his American business partners issued formal distances, and the investigation moved from regulatory to federal. Tiana did not gloat. She was too busy. Her role at Kwon Capital had expanded almost immediately. She was now managing 3 major legal matters simultaneously, building out a compliance team and consulting on 2 new fund structures. She had found, to her own quiet satisfaction, that she was extraordinary at this. Not just competent, extraordinary. Tomalola came to visit in the 4th week, arriving with a carry-on suitcase and the energy of someone who had been saving celebratory feelings for a very long time. They had dinner at a restaurant in the West Village, at a corner table, with a bottle of wine that cost more than Tiana's first paycheck at her first firm. They laughed in the way that women who have known each other since university laugh, without editing, without performance, referencing things no one else would understand. "Okay, first," Tomalola said, the moment the wine was poured. "We are doing a toast." "Tomi, I have been waiting 4 months to do this toast. I prepared it." She raised her glass. "To Tiana and Kechi Okonkwo, who was handed a prenuptial agreement like a parking ticket, who took it, read it, filed it, and then turned around and dismantled an entire financial operation with 47 pages and a clear head, who left a pot of jollof rice on the stove, which, for the record, is the only part of this story I'm still upset about, and walked into her own power." She clinked her glass against Tiana's. "To the most legally terrifying woman I have ever met." Tiana laughed, the real kind, involuntary, embarrassingly genuine. The jollof rice was actually fine. And I turned off the burner. Of course you did. Even in crisis, you are responsible. You're ridiculous. I'm the person who loved you when you were making breakfast for a man who didn't deserve it, and I love you now that you're making $100 decisions from a 44th floor office, so I am exactly the right amount of ridiculous. They ate and talked for 3 hours. They talked about work and about men and about their mothers and about the particular experience of being ambitious black women in spaces that had not been built with them in mind and that they were rearranging brick by brick anyway. They talked about Tomalola's own work, a promotion she was considering that would require moving to London, which she was ambivalent about. They talked about Lagos, and about the cousin's wedding they'd both attended 4 years ago, where Tiana had worn orange and Jaewon, meeting the family for the first time, had somehow charmed every single aunt in the room by the end of the night. They're going to ask about him, Tomalola said, when you go home for Christmas. I know. What are you going to say? Tiana thought about it. The truth, that things are complicated, that I'm okay, that complicated and okay can exist at the same time. Tomalola nodded. Your mother already knows, doesn't she? My mother always knows. She called me, 3 weeks ago, just to ask how you were. Tiana looked at her. What did you tell her? I told her you were the best I'd ever seen you, which is the truth. Tomalola looked at her steadily. She said, good. And she was never meant to be a supporting role. The table was quiet for a moment. Your mother, Tomalola said, is the most devastating person I have ever met. I come from somewhere. They split dessert. On the way out, the maitre d' recognized Tiana from the conference photo that had been circulating online and said something warm and slightly flustered in French. Tiana thanked him in French. Tomalola stared. Since when do you speak French? I've always spoken French. You've just never needed me to. Tomalola pointed at her. You are the most alarming person I know, and I want you in my life forever. You look different, Tomalola said. Different how? Like yourself. Tomalola looked at her carefully. Like the version of you before you made your life so small to fit inside his. Tiana thought about that. And I didn't know I was doing it. That's the thing about it. You never do. I loved him. She said it without embarrassment. I don't know what I feel. It's complicated. Feelings about someone who hurt you are always complicated. That doesn't mean you owe him anything. I know. He called again, 3 times this week. What does he want? To explain, to apologize. I don't know. She paused. He sounds different. Different how? Tiana tried to find the right word. Scared, she said finally. He sounds scared. Tomalola was quiet for a moment. That man has never been scared of anything in his life. I know. Which means you did something to him that no one else has ever managed. I showed him what it looked like when he was left with the consequences of his own choices, she said. One, he's never had to stand inside that before. She agreed to meet him, not because she had forgiven him, that was a separate, longer conversation she was still having with herself, but because she needed to close something, to look at him in person and know what she felt when there was no phone between them. He came to New York. She made him come to her building, to the conference room on the 44th floor with the view of Midtown that she had started thinking of as hers. She told Kwan. Kwan said, without any particular expression, I'll be nearby. You don't need to be. He looked at her for a moment. I know I don't need to be. I want to be. He paused. He is still a dangerous man. He's not dangerous to me. No, Kwan said, in a tone that suggested he understood exactly why that was true. And I suppose he isn't. Jaewon arrived in a black coat, no tie, looking like he had not slept well in several weeks. He walked into the conference room and stopped when he saw her. She was standing at the window, hands folded, watching him. He looked older, not badly older, just more worn, like a wall that had been load-bearing for a long time and was finally showing the strain. He had always carried a certain indestructibility, a quality that made people believe he could not be touched by anything ordinary. He looked ordinary today, human. She found that she did not feel the satisfaction she had expected. She mostly felt tired. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he sat down at the conference table. Not at the head, which she had half expected from habit, but in the middle. Across from where she eventually took a chair, and he put both hands flat on the table and looked at her. "I let someone make me afraid of you," he said, no preamble. "And instead of talking to you, I tried to push you out. That was a betrayal, not just a mistake. A betrayal, and I know that saying I'm sorry isn't the same as it being undone." Tiana watched him. "What do you want, Jaewon?" "I want to understand why, after everything, you still fought for my company. You didn't have to file that case. You had already left. You could have let Daijung have everything." He looked at her carefully. "Why didn't you?" She considered the question honestly. "Because what he was doing was wrong. Because your company employs 300 people, most of whom had nothing to do with any of this. On because I am a lawyer, and I do not let injustice win just because it doesn't hurt me anymore." She paused. "And because, whether I like it or not, you are someone I was willing to fight for once. That doesn't go away overnight just because you gave me paperwork." Something shifted in his face. "Tiana, don't." She held up a hand. "Whatever you're about to say, I need you to understand where I am. I am not the woman who made you jollof rice at 7 in the morning anymore. Not because she was weak, but because she deserved better than what you did with her care. That woman is still here. She just knows her value now." "I always knew your value," he said. "I was just afraid, I know." She looked at him. "But you let fear make you cruel, Jaewon. And you let it make you someone who handed his wife divorce papers instead of a conversation. And that is something you have to live with, not something I can fix for you." He was quiet for a long time. His hands were still flat on the table. She noticed that he wasn't wearing the watch. Neither of them, either one, just bare wrists. "The engraving," she said. He looked up. "Sharp as you are." She said it quietly. "You were, but you let someone dull you." He flinched. It was small and he controlled it quickly, but she saw it. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now you go back to Chicago and you rebuild what Daijung damaged. You do your work, I do mine." She kept her voice even. "Our lawyers will be in touch about the prenup renegotiation. My counsel has some thoughts." "Your counsel." He said it with something that might have been bleak amusement. "Bridget Choi. You've heard of her. Everyone has heard of her." He looked at her. "Is she expensive?" "Extremely." The corner of his mouth moved, just slightly. "Good." She looked at him with an expression she couldn't entirely read. Grief, respect, something underneath it that was quieter and more permanent. "And us?" Tiana looked at him steadily. "I don't know," she said. "That is the most honest answer I have." He nodded slowly. He stood up. At the door he paused and turned back. "For what it's worth," he said, "I think Kwon Tae-seok is the smartest man I know, and I think hiring you was the best decision he's ever made." A pause. "It was also the best decision you've ever made for yourself." She said nothing. When he left, she stood at the window for a long time after, watching the city below, feeling the particular texture of a moment that was neither ending nor beginning, but something in the middle. An arrival at a place you couldn't have predicted from where you started. 6 months after the morning with the jollof rice, Tiana Okonkwo stood in the main hall of the Federal Trade Commission building in Washington, D.C., in a navy suit that fit her like authority itself, and watched a team of investigators accept the final submission that formally ended Park Dae-jung's American operation. The night before the final D.C. submission, Tiana had been awake at 1 in the morning going through the documentation one last time, not because it needed another review, but because she was the kind of person who checked the parachute even after someone she trusted had already checked it. Her junior associate, a young woman from Houston named Precious, who had been with her for 4 months and was already one of the sharpest legal minds Tiana had worked with, knocked on her office door and brought her a cup of tea without being asked. "You should go home," Precious said. "I will. You've reviewed that section 4 times. 5th time is for luck." Precious sat down across from her. She was 28, natural hair in twists, with the direct, unflinching manner of someone who had decided early that apologizing for being smart was a waste of everyone's time. Tiana had hired her on the spot 2 minutes into an interview. And when Precious had identified a structural flaw in a contract Tiana had handed her as a test, without being told that was what it was. "Can I ask you something?" Precious said. "Yes." "Did you know when you made the decision to go to New York that it would work out this way?" Tiana looked at her. "No." "Were you scared?" "Constantly." She picked up the tea. "Being scared is not the same as being stopped." Precious nodded slowly, like she was writing that down somewhere inside herself. "Go home," Tiana said. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow is a big day and I need you to be sharp." Pot calling the kettle. "Go home, Precious." She went home. It had taken 6 months. It had required 4 regulatory bodies, 2 federal agencies, 11 depositions, when in a level of legal architecture that her supervising professors at Columbia Law School would have enjoyed if they could have seen it. It was the most comprehensive piece of work she had ever produced, and it was complete. Kwan Tai Seok stood beside her as the handshake happened. He said nothing. He didn't have to. The phone call that surprised her most came from a woman she had known at the edges of Chicago's professional social scene, a woman named Yoonju, who had been in Jaewon's social orbit longer than Tiana had, and who had never been anything more than polite at events they both attended. Yoonju called her directly. "I want you to know," she said without preamble, "that I told him 2 years ago that Daijung was not what he presented himself to be. He didn't listen." A pause. "He should have listened to the women in the room. He always knew the men in the room. He was less good at knowing the women." "That's changing," Tiana said. "Yes, I can see that." Another pause. "You were always the most prepared person in every room, Tiana. I hope you know that." She had not known, or not fully known, until that moment, that it had been visible to people outside her own careful self-assessment. It was a strange thing, to be seen by someone you hadn't known was watching. "Thank you," she said, and meant it. She had moved into the apartment by then, a place on the Upper West Side, high enough to see the park, with a kitchen she had slowly learned to make her own. She had bought new furniture. She had hung a painting her mother sent from Lagos. She had created, piece by piece, a life that belonged only to her. And she was not healed in the way that movies meant when they used that word, as if healing was a destination you arrived at and then stayed in. She was still finding the edges of what the last 4 years had been. Still occasionally waking at 2 in the morning with a feeling she couldn't name. Still sometimes reaching for her phone to send Jaewon a message about something that had happened at work, the reflex of a shared life not yet fully unwired. But she was whole. She was certain of that. Timalola flew in for the weekend when the D.C. submission was finalized. They sat in Tiana's new kitchen eating the jollof rice Tiana had made, because she had never actually stopped making jollof rice. She had only temporarily stopped making it for someone who didn't deserve it. And Tamalola raised her glass of palm wine and said, "On with absolute sincerity. To the most dangerous woman I know." Tiana raised hers, "To knowing your own power. And to never cooking a man's breakfast at 7 in the morning unless he's absolutely earned it." They both laughed, the real kind, the kind that lived in the body and not just the face. Back in Chicago, Jaewon had done what she had told him to do. He had rebuilt. The 3 board members Daejung's people had placed had been quietly removed. The contracts that had been redirected were renegotiated. He had publicly announced a restructured leadership team, which included, in the legal advisory capacity, a firm that happened to be led by a former colleague of Tiana's. He was not rebuilding carelessly. He was rebuilding like a man who had understood something about the cost of carelessness. They spoke on the phone twice a month. Formally at first, legal matters, the prenup renegotiation, the final documentation around the separation of certain assets. Then less formally, he would call sometimes without agenda, and they would talk about work, news, nothing important, the way people talked when they were still figuring out what they were to each other. She did not know yet. She was not in a hurry to decide. She had learned that certainty was not always a prerequisite for movement. You could move forward without knowing exactly where you were going, as long as you knew your own value clearly enough to refuse to go somewhere you didn't belong. That, she thought, was the most expensive thing she had ever learned, and the most useful. 9 months after the envelope on the kitchen counter, Tiana was giving the keynote address at a women's legal leadership conference in Atlanta. Standing at the podium, looking out at a room of 300 women in law, young, established, early career, late career, all of them with something in common that had brought them to this room on a Thursday morning. She felt something she didn't have a precise word for. It was the feeling of arriving somewhere after a long journey and finding the place exactly as it should be. She had been asked to speak on resilience, on what it meant to rebuild. The organizer, a woman in her 60s named Dr. Abena Mensah, had introduced her with the kind of warm thoroughness that communicated, "I know exactly who this person is, and I want everyone in this room to understand why." She had cited 3 of Tiana's cases by name. She had mentioned, "I'm briefly and without drama, the regulatory submission that had taken down Park Dae-jung's operation." She had said, "When Tiana Okonkwo walks into a room, the room changes. Not because she demands it, because excellence is contagious, and she is, simply put, excellent." The room had applauded before Tiana was even at the podium. She stood there for a moment before she began, and she looked at the room, and she thought about the morning with the jollof rice, about the envelope, about the 42 missed calls she had not answered, about her mother's voice at 11 o'clock at night saying, "What does your chest feel like?" She thought about every room she had walked into and been underestimated, about every document she had read and been sharper than the person who wrote it. One about the prenup she had allowed to be written by someone else's lawyers, and what that had cost her, and what she had built from the cost. She leaned into the microphone. "I want to talk to you today," she said, "about the moment someone tries to manage you into a smaller version of yourself, and what you do next." The room went completely quiet. Because here is what I have learned. Power is not given. Power is not inherited. Power is not granted to you by the person who married you or hired you or vouched for you. Power is built. It is built in the decisions you make when you are afraid, when you are angry, when someone who was supposed to protect you hands you paperwork instead. She paused. It is built in the moment you choose to go to New York instead of going to bed crying. And it is built in every room where you sit with your back straight, even when your heart is broken. She looked out at the room, 300 women, every single one of them listening. "Someone tried to remove me from the board," she said, "and what they got instead was me at the table, their table, running things." The applause started before she finished the sentence. She let it settle. She did not rush past it. She stood in it and let it mean what it meant, because she had earned the right to stand in a room full of people who understood what she was talking about. She continued. She talked for 40 minutes. When she finished, the room stood. She stood at the podium and felt it wash over her, not as validation, because she had stopped needing external validation somewhere on the 40th floor of a Midtown Manhattan building, but as resonance, as recognition, as the sound of 300 women who understood exactly what she was talking about because they had lived some version of it themselves. After the conference, a young woman came up to her in the hallway. 26, natural hair, a look in her eyes that Tiana recognized, someone at the beginning of understanding what she was capable of. "How did you know it would work out?" the young woman asked. Tiana considered the question carefully. "I didn't," she said. "I had no idea how it would work out. I just knew that the alternative, staying quiet, signing the paper, accepting the smallest version of myself, was not something I was willing to do." She looked at the young woman. "Well, you don't need certainty to move. You need clarity. Know what you will not accept. Everything else you figure out as you go." The young woman wrote that down. Tiana watched her do it and felt something very quiet and very steady inside herself. Then the young woman looked up and said, "I'm in my second year of law school. I have a professor who keeps telling me that the way I argue is too aggressive, too confident, that I need to learn how to make the people I'm arguing against feel comfortable." She paused. "What do you think about that?" Tiana looked at her for a long moment. "I think," she said carefully, "that a courtroom is not a place for the comfort of the person on the other side of your argument. And I think that confidence and aggression are two entirely different things, and people use them interchangeably when they want to soften someone who is winning." She paused. "Stay confident. Learn to be precise. The world will call it aggressive either way. You might as well make it worth the label." The young woman stared at her. Then she said, "Can I quote you on that?" "You can." Someone in the hallway, she found out later it was a second-year student with 50,000 followers on social media, had been recording the exchange. That 5-second clip circulated for a week. Back in New York that evening, her phone rang. Jay Wan, she answered. I saw the coverage from Atlanta, he said. Someone live-streamed the keynote. I know. He stopped, tried again. You were extraordinary. I know, she said again. Oh, not arrogance, certainty. He laughed. It was the laugh she remembered. Real, unguarded, the one that had made her fall for him in the first place, in a boardroom 3 years before they got married, when she had been representing a counterparty, and he had been impossible to rattle, and had laughed at one of her arguments not because it was wrong, but because it was so precisely right that it surprised him. Tiana, he said, Jae-won. I know I don't get to ask for things from you right now. I know that's not where we are. His voice was careful, deliberate. But I want you to know that I see you, the way I should have always seen you, and I'm not saying that to get anything. I'm saying it because you deserve to hear it from me. She was quiet for a moment. Thank you, she said, and meant it. Okay. He exhaled slowly. Good night. Aw, Tiana. Good night. She set the phone down and walked to the window. The park was dark below, the city lit up around it, the skyline doing its usual thing, asserting itself against the dark, insisting on its own brightness. She thought about what her mother had said, the night everything broke open. What does your chest feel like? She put a hand to her sternum, pressed gently. Clear, she thought, solid, mine. She had not been the wife who quietly fell apart. She had been the attorney who documented everything, filed the right paperwork with the right agencies, and made sure that the people who had tried to reduce her became cautionary tales instead. She had been exactly what she had always been. It had just taken someone trying to take it from her to show her how much it was worth. When she turned away from the window and went to her kitchen, she had not eaten since the conference. She opened the refrigerator and assessed what was available, and she made the quiet decision that she was going to make herself jollof rice at 9:30 on a Thursday night because she wanted it, because she deserved it, because it was hers. She turned on music. She moved around her kitchen in the apartment she had built into a home, the one that was hers, with her grandmother's necklace hanging from a hook near the sink and her mother's painting on the wall and a view of the park through the window. And she cooked. Not for anyone, for herself, which, as it turned out, was exactly the right reason. Tiana Okonkwo had walked into a marriage and been handed an envelope. She had walked out and into herself. Once she had taken the thing that was meant to diminish her and used it to build an empire, a reputation, and a life that finally completely reflected who she had always been. No one had seen it coming. That was their mistake. Because the most dangerous thing in the world is not a woman who is angry. It is a woman who is clear. And Tiana Okonkwo, attorney, executive, daughter of Lagos, citizen of the world, had never been clearer in her life. If you made it to the end of this story, you are officially part of the family. Drop a comment below. Did Tiana handle this perfectly, or should she have forgiven him sooner? Tell us what you think, and please subscribe if you haven't. We post new Afro-Korean stories every week, and you do not want to miss what's coming next. Hit the like button for Tiana. She earned it.